When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked, and in which my boat lay grounded. Though one might well imagine that my first sense, for there was in the air, the region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other less describable things which I saw protruding from the. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words. There was nothing within hearing and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic so great was the nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead thing. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. That night, I encamped, and on the following day, by the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which an intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again. And in the glow of the moon, without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, picking up my pack, I stopped. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous as the moon climbed higher in the sky. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent. Whilst after a urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath. Gazing into the Stygian deeps. All at once, an object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. But I was a closer scrutiny, for despite its enormous magnitude, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monster whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed across the chasm, on whose surface the writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books. consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size, were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a doré. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men. Though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto. Or paying homage at some of their for them, grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were glass. Curiously enough, they seemed, for one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, but in a moment decided that they were merely some tribe whose last. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood then, with only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface. The thing slid into view above the dark waters. Polyphemus-like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. Indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention.